LiSTNR production.
A warning. This episode contains references to sexual assault, child sexual abuse, and violence against children. If this content does affect you, the number for Lifeline is 13 11 14. G'day, I'm former police officer Brent Sanders, and for the past 25 years I've dedicated myself to sharing what I've learnt on the force to the Australian public so they can better protect themselves from falling victim to crime. So with the help of some of the most respected current and former detectives and high-ranking law enforcement agents, we're going to pull back the curtain on what life is like on the force and what they've learned about how crime and criminals really work. These are real stories from real detectives. This week, how Victoria Police investigated some of Australia's most infamous serial sex offenders. Adrian Paterson is a former Victoria Police detective with more than 3 decades of investigative experience. He's seen hundreds of cases and prosecuted dozens of high-profile criminals. But, as you'll hear, there are 2 in particular that stand out to him and many in the force. The second case is one you may know, with the man responsible being considered one of Australia's most serious offenders.
It's just beyond belief, beyond words. It really is.
We'll get to that case, but first, Adrian's just been recruited for a task force after a string of sexual assaults in Melbourne's outer eastern suburbs.
Yeah, I was working at the Nunawading CIB as a divisional detective. It wasn't just myself, there was a task force, I guess you'd call us, that was put together as these offences were reported, and gradually a theme or a course of conduct started to come out where the offender, or suspect as he was at the time, Peter John Vatos, a particularly unsavoury character, he chose to carry a small silver handgun, and that was produced at quite a number of the offences, and the media labelled him the silver gun rapist, which for ourselves was also good because it put it into the spotlight of the media, let the general public be aware of who he was and what to look out for.
For a task force, Adrian, to be put together, of which you were a detective as part of that task force, could I ask how many incidences, how many attacks on women had occurred before there was a realisation that, okay, we seem to be dealing with a serial sex offender here? How far into that series before that task force is formed?
From memory, I believe it was 2 working, as I say, from the divisional office. We had 4 detectives there, and then we built up a couple of other members came in and joined on, experienced detectives as well, because we wanted to have a red-hot go at this guy. And the amount of time and effort that was put into it by that group, all working out of the Nunawading CIB headquarters, it was a little bit unusual at the time, but as the third one came in and what have you, it just compounded the fact that it wasn't just isolated incidents. These were definitely being tied into the same guy, the same MO, that method of operation, that we had to really make a concerted effort to try and nail him. But he was, quite some time, unfortunately, before we got a breakthrough.
There's this pattern, isn't there, that starts to make its way to the surface when it's the same offender. Where does the investigation go from with regards to how do we identify who this offender is?
Trying to identify him himself, like he wore gloves most of the time. There was no fingerprints. The fact that he came in through unlocked doors. We did this similar fact chart, we call it, which at that time was quite extraordinary. It was probably about 1 metre diameter, tying in all these different points, things that he would have said. All those things, you just pinpoint them from one offence after the other, and you can link them, and there's documented cases where an offender may have been, we might have had, say, 70, 80% case against the person there, and one of these charts is brought into evidence. And the magistrate or His Honour would have a look at that chart and look at all those similar facts, and that's what it's called, a similar fact chart. Look at it and say that in his mind he's got no doubt that the person who committed these offences were one and the same. So they carry a lot of weight, and the more similar facts that you can get just to load it up. And as I say, there was a lot with VATOS, but unfortunately, despite the tremendous effort that went into that chart, which is, as I say, it's probably about a diameter, 3 foot diameter, about a metre, there was one small part that was deemed to be inadmissible by His Honour, and accordingly, the whole chart was not admitted into evidence, which was it's just devastating for us.
Frustrating. Just using that term again, similar fact evidence. Would it be correct in saying that what that enables the investigators to do, if they can get a conviction on one of these, if they can prove one beyond reasonable doubt, we get a flow on through these other locations through that similar fact evidence? Is that describing it correctly, Adrian?
Yeah, no, that's a good description. Not only for getting it into evidence itself, but also to help identify a particular person through that course of conduct. There were a couple of guys that I had at one stage that would break into safes, bank safes and whatever else, and they would use a magnetic drill. That was my first introduction to a magnetic drill, that they would lock it onto the safe and it would maintain its integrity there, and then they could precision drill the combination on the safe. Now, that's a fairly unique way of breaking in. So if you had a number of safes all done the same way, then you're going to tie those two guys into all those particular safe robberies. Even the Russell Street bombing, which I think a lot of people may still remember, where the car was parked out the front. The main offender was going to drive it actually in underneath the CIB building, which was enclosed within the Russell Street complex, and it would have brought the whole building down, but he chickened out when he got to the entrance and just drove it around and parked it out the front, where it ultimately went off and killed Angela Taylor, a young policewoman there, and critically hurt a lot of other people there. But that car, when it was reassembled, it was blown to pieces, was reassembled in a secure area, and one of the guys from the stolen motor vehicle squad wandered down to have a bit of a look. He wasn't in the investigation itself, went down to have a bit of a look. When he saw the engine, and the engine number had been removed or obliterated, as soon as he saw it, he just went to the investigator and said, "I know who did that," because the manner in which that work was done on that engine block, he had seen before and was able to nominate who actually changed that number on the car. So once again, it didn't specifically go to court, but it identified a suspect, and then you can build the case around that suspect.
And if we apply that principle back here to this serial sex offender, you're gathering up a lot of information with regards to signature, with regards to his MO, but there's some good old-fashioned sort of door-knocking policing, isn't there, which was a big, big step for you to identifying or being able to identify who this individual actually was. Can you just explain that to us?
Oh, yes, that was, sometimes the planets align, as they say. The last young woman that was attacked down in South Vermont, just east of Melbourne, one of the outer eastern suburbs, I was one of the first detectives to attend with another close mate, Paul Schilling. Once the crime scene's been preserved, we called in the forensic guys, and all the cavalry arrived, as we say, and the witnesses separated, and we started to get our statements and what have you. So I did a door-to-door, and one of our investigative phrases, I guess, we throw around is that fail to search is fail to find, all those sort of things. So I knocked on a couple of doors down, and an elderly lady came to the door. I can probably say that, being a bit elderly myself now, but I thought, well, you don't know, you just asked. So I said, I just wonder if you could, we had this incident just a couple of doors down there. She said, oh, yeah, I saw all the police cars. I said, can you tell me if you've seen any person, any vehicle, anything unusual in the last 7 to 10 days that might be of help to us? And she thought for a moment, said, well, I did see a car. And I said, oh, okay. Yeah, great. Okay, can you describe the car to me? And she said, it was a 1987 XC Ford Falcon. And I paused for a moment. I thought, in a very, not an unpleasant way, but I thought, gee, Grandma, that's pretty definitive, 87 XC Ford. And she just explained that they owned one. She said, we've got one, the same as that. She said, only this one I saw was a station wagon. I thought, oh, okay, oh, great. Anything further you can tell me about it? She said, oh, it's just was a dark navy blue, like an inky blue. I said, oh, okay, great, yeah, keep going, keep it coming. And she said it looked like it had may have had a trailer, it had been on the back and had come off and it hit the tailgate and punched a dent right in the back of the tailgate in this XC Ford. I was a little bit gobsmacked, to be honest. I thought, really, that's good heavens. What about anybody inside? And she said, oh, well, I could see it was just a large person with a lot of long hair, just a big, long, hairy person, big guy. And I said, so what drew your attention to this car anyway? She said, it was just literally rolling very slowly as it went past. And this is where, as I mentioned before, Vatos had been around and gone past the address, numerous times, just sussing it all out. So we had that description of that vehicle. So I thought that's unfortunately no registration number, but. So that was a great exciting moment in the investigation to at least get that. I'm not saying it was the person, but it was a hell of a lot more than we'd had before.
That's an incredible amount of information evidence from one door knock, isn't it? I mean, you could work for months and months and months to try and gather that amount of evidence, but to have one person who saw that vehicle, saw the person in the vehicle, and something that identifies, okay, it's not a registration plate, but there's a ding on the back of that vehicle. That's a lot to work with, isn't it, at that point of an investigation?
Oh, it certainly is. One of the phrases that I used to throw around a bit, especially when I lectured at detective training for a while, is that people look but they don't observe. So they'll say, oh, yeah, I saw that. And I say, well, can you describe it? Oh, not really. Or if it was a person. Yeah, I saw that guy. Can you describe him? Oh, no, he's just average. So they see, but they don't actually take it in, because there's no need most times. So to find somebody who actually has that information to impart to you, it's a breath of fresh air at times. But we were lucky a short time thereafter to get an equally good break on him.
That information that was provided by that lady looking out a window about the vehicle links just a little further down the track to another confrontation where you believe that vehicle was present at that particular confrontation.
Yeah, yes, you're right. There's a woman walking home with some shopping, inclement weather, a bit damp. Vehicle pulled up alongside her, and the person in the car called out, do you want a ride? Can I give you a lift? The weather's, it's raining, sort of thing. And she thought the driver was quite an unsavoury looking character, fairly big with longish hair. So she declined, and he just drove off slowly. And as she drove off, she thought it didn't like the look of him very much, and she noted the back of the XC blue Ford station wagon with a dent in the back, and noted the number down. And because there was so much high profile in the media about about this rapist being in the area, some people may. I don't know, a lot of people see things, but then they think, oh, what's the point? It probably wasn't. But this woman did make that point of coming to us and say, look, I saw this guy, this is what happened. And, of course, then we had the number of the car, and the world just opened up for us. It was amazing. Yeah, it was good.
When you ran that registration number through the police computer, he came back as a registered owner.
Yeah. Yeah, Peter John Vatos, and he wasn't all that, didn't live all that far. He operated in and around that outer eastern area. He had a girlfriend when we raided the house and brought him in. The girlfriend came in as well, and she didn't want to know anything about it. They were both very evasive. But once we started to put the screws on Peter, she buckled a little bit, in as much as that. The house itself was like an Aladdin's cave. It took small trucks to clean all the stolen property from their place to take it back to Nuttawading. And it was literally had to get all people from different shops to come in and identify their property that had been stolen, and burglaries where property had been stolen again to come and identify all the things. It was an incredible amount of stolen property that came back. So there was no way they were going to jump over the burglary offences. So when we mentioned that Peter had been, she said, no. Well, okay, so we got caught. Yeah, okay, we did burglaries together. Okay, so we did burglaries, but no. What do you mean, Peter? No. Peter and I, that's all we ever did. So it took a little bit of convincing to get her to understand that they'd go out and do burglaries, and then he'd go out on days of his own choosing and commit the rapes on the women. And it didn't go down too well with his girlfriend. When they try to cover up, of course, that's when all the questions, the good questions come out that we now, instead of saying, oh, you did this and you did that, just throwing it out, and they say, no, I didn't, you just got a confrontation. So well, tell me what you did on that day. And so we went to Phillip Island. So, okay, that's great. Nice to go to Phillip Island. Have lunch anywhere? Oh, yeah, well, tell me about lunch. Oh, we stopped at so-and-so. Tell me what you had. So you're getting information out, and, of course, then they trip up. One says, oh, we had fish and chips. The other one said we had a pie with sauce. The stories fall apart, so it doesn't take all that long to break that down. So she was quite devastated that Mr. Vatos would do that to her, so to speak.
Such interesting points that you're raising in your recollection there, Adrian. It's interesting, isn't it, that... and I don't want this to be taken the wrong way, but you don't mind it when, if you're interviewing somebody, particularly when you've gathered up a lot of evidence, as you had in this case, you don't mind it when they actually start lying in those police statements, do you? Because you just sort of give them enough rope, they'll hang themselves type of thing. And particularly when you get two people together in separate interview rooms and they're both sort of trying to tell the same lies about the same thing, the cracks start to appear pretty quickly, don't they? Oh,
absolutely. It's a technique that's been introduced some years ago now. It was kicked off over in UK, and basically TEDS, tell me, explain to me, describe to me, show me. So, tell me what you did. Describe that to me. Show me what you did. So all they're doing is giving you information. So I'll just say, for an example, TV might have been knocked off the loading bay outside a bulk store. So somebody might have got a description or what enough to bring in a suspect. So tell me what you did last Friday night. Instead of saying, you stole the TV, he says, no, I didn't. Say, yes, you did. No, you didn't. You're not getting anywhere. So he would say, well, I went out with a few mates. Okay, great. Yeah, good to go out with a few mates. Tell me what you did when you went out. Oh, we did this, that and the other. Oh, describe that to me. So they start telling you a story, and then gradually they might say, I went out with a few mates, and say, well, you've only got a ute's only got two seats. Where'd the other guy sit? Well, one of the other guys might have taken his car. So then, you can see where it's going. The more they tell you, they think, this copper hasn't got a clue. So they just feed you as much bullshit as they want to, and then all of a sudden they realise they've just dug a hole for themselves. It works well.
You've done a warrant on this house, and it's chocker full of stolen gear. And it turns out that he and his girlfriend were doing a fair few burgs around the place. When we look at serial sex offenders, if there's one commonality that we often see amongst serial sex offenders, if they have any history at all, it's often a history of burglary. And just a couple of questions around that. Was any of the stolen property that you recovered property that had been stolen from his victims during a series of attacks?
Not specifically as in family property, but once again, to, as we say, throw another shovelful of cement into the concrete to make it nice and solid. When his vehicle was brought back, I actually searched that station wagon and having a look on the passenger side, hand up underneath there, feel up around the glove box, look in the glove box, search the car from top to toe, of course, but then hand right up the back and up on top of the glove box. What's that? A pair of gloves. So out come the gloves. You think, oh, happy days. Work towards the back of the car. So, take out the spare wheel, take out the floor mat, and there's a millway. That's probably have them up in New South as well. Street directory in the old the book type. Start to have a thumb through that, and there's some of the addresses that where rapes had been conducted, had been circled in the book, and of all things, there happened to be a photograph of one of the young victims that he'd taken that was inside the millway. Now it's a bit hard to jump that. Yeah. It's just hard to explain the feeling of job satisfaction, I guess, when you're doing it at the best of your ability, and not only does it just fall into place, but it's just gold-plated. It's just gold-plated because there's no way that can be argued in court, that I didn't do it or whatever else. You got the evidence always tells a story, and there was more than enough there. It was good.
And just on that, you take someone like that to court, he's usually going to get a barrister. He's in his head, he's going to try and sort of plead not guilty. There'd be a lot of criminal barristers, defence counsels who look at that amount of evidence and say to their client, you know what, you're better off nodding the head here. Did he nod the head? Did he admit to it, or did he plead not guilty, or what happened in the court case?
From memory, it ran very smoothly. That I think it was the way they describe it to, or the barrister describe it to their client, is that you're going to look pretty damn bad if you get up in court and say, I didn't do it. I don't know what you're talking about. And then the victims are all brought into court one by one, by one, by one. And Vatos would be told that it's going to look pretty damning upon yourself if you have to stand there and these girls have to go through all that, or these women have to go through it and relive all of that when you're going to go down anyway. So if you make a plea on that guilty, then they'll accept that as, they might give you, I don't know what they do, give you 10% off or something like that for the sake of not having to put all the victims through the trauma of reliving the events. So that's usually the carrot they dangle.
And in this case, that's what happened. He pleaded guilty to the charges that were laid against him.
Yep. The best part was that they didn't have to, the women all didn't have to go to court. So that was good.
Now, this is back in 1981. This is a long time ago. Sentencing is a lot heavier now. What did he get back in 1981?
He got 25 years.
That's a great result, isn't it, back then?
Yeah, that was a really, really great result. It absolutely was. And you couldn't wish anything less on that particular guy. He was just a totally unforgiving, sick unit. I don't know how I should describe him. He was just a piece of trash, This is the part that where policing does get frustrating at times, that you put all that work in and you're doing everything you can for the victim, bleeding for the victims and that as well. And then you go to court, and if the courts don't back it up, the victims look at you and say, well, why did we do all this? So it hurts us when we don't get a result that we believe the public would expect. And we get told that it's nothing to do with us in the big picture. The laws are made, we're there to enforce the laws, and once the offender's been taken before the court, we have no further interest in it, so to speak. It's up to the courts to decide what they do, but it certainly hurts when you're on the victim side and you're sort of holding their hand and just watching the events play out, that if it doesn't go the way that you and they would hope, it does hurt. It does hurt us as well. It really does.
Which I guess makes cases like this, as distasteful as they are with regards to what happened to these girls and women, memorable in the fact that an offender was found guilty, sent to prison for a considerable time, and none of that can change what happened to these girls and these women, but at least they can walk away feeling in some way vindicated for having come forward.
Oh, absolutely. Been retired now for quite a number of years, but I did get a call to produce a statement that, or if I still had one, or reproduce another, for two young girls that were sexually attacked in St Kilda down here in Melbourne about 40 plus years ago. I interviewed them from the point of view of trying to get an offender description from a forensic artist type of position, something we don't normally do. Often we'd interview the witnesses one by one so that one doesn't influence the other. But they were two young girls, they were only 16, they were a little bit uncomfortable, so I just made the choice, which is unusual, to interview them both together, and normally that wouldn't happen. They both jointly described the offender in a photo fit type format that I put together, and I said to one of them, I said, how do you think? She said, no, I reckon that's really, really good. That looks just like him. So I got her to sign that, and adopting that description that she gave me, I said to the other girl, I said, what do you think about it? She said, no, look, I think it's really, really good like him too, but I don't think the hair's quite right. So I adjusted that and changed that hair to a different type of image, and I got her to sign that one. So that's why it was easy for me to remember this particular case. So when I got a call from the cold case chaps, they had come up with a suspect through DNA all these years, 40 odd years later, that targeted a particular person as possibly being that guy. So when they came out with a suspect through the DNA, they said, we still got the descriptions that the two girls gave. And that's when they queried, how come there's two? I said, well, I can't remember, because it was just a one-off, really, to interview two people at once, and produced the photograph. And they went back and had a look at the suspect, and they said he nearly walked out of it. It was that accurate from the two girls had put together. And this is only, I'd say, in the last 12 months, something like that. So, I put all the statements together, to go to court in retirement, so go up and give evidence about it. And he rolled. I haven't got the exact details on me. I was just more than excited to have got that information that after 40-odd years he was identified, that the descriptions were spot on, and I I think he's in his 60s, and I think he got 10 plus years for raping those girls about 40, 45 years ago. So when you get results that reflect the satisfaction, I guess you could get from the victims, that's what we work for. That's why we do it.
Could you take us to the early 1970s? You're brought in to investigate a set of horrific homicides committed by the now infamous Derek Ernest Percy. Can you walk us through that job?
Derek Percy, he every so often somebody seems to come out of the woodwork in a horrific nature that is confronting to the general public, particularly involving children. And Derek, he was a pretty sad, sick individual in the big picture of things. I think in the subsequent years, we're talking back in the 1950s, but he had been assessed by psychologists and psychiatrists, and they all agreed that there was something not quite right there, but they couldn't put their finger on it, silly as it sounds, because he was so sharp at the things that he said that they would wonder whether he was actually leading them along or whether he was genuinely twisted. He was just, I don't know how to describe him. Right from when he was a young kid, he was born in 1948. Mum and Dad, they moved around a bit. His dad moved around, and of course, the family went with him. And Derek, he travelled around and went to different schools and that. They lived in a caravan park down at Chelsea, down here in Victoria. They moved out to Warrnambool, down on the coast. It ended up at Mount Beauty, up in the hills up in the northeast of Melbourne, and he was a little bit different, according to some of his school friends and that thought he was just a little bit of an oddball. At one stage, one of his schoolmates remembered that there was a bit of a flap hanging off his shoe or something, so he always carried a knife, and he always carried a knife in the sheath, right through his lifetime pretty much, I guess, generalising that. And he was slicing it off, and the knife slipped and went straight into his leg and made a decent gouge on all accounts. And to the surprise of the others, there was no scream or yell. He just sort of looked, thought, I've stuck a knife in myself. And they all thought that was pretty weird that there was no reaction. I thought there's a little bit, what do you say to that? It's not natural, but there was a lot of hidden around that Mount Beauty area, which is only a small town up in the hills where people go up to look at all the autumn leaves and things. Lovely place just out of Melbourne. They had a series of snow droppings, they used to call it, which was women's underwear and things being taken off clotheslines. Puts him in a little bit of a out there position, I guess, in amongst all his friends and that. Why would he? Yeah, he's different, Derek. He's a bit different.
Just on that. Snowdropping, that's an interesting term. It's an old school term that you're using there, and it refers to the theft of particularly women's clothing, women's underwear and things like that, and it can be from clotheslines. It can also be as a result of break and enters, burglaries, and one of the things with that you would know, of course, Adrian, with your experience, is it's a crime which can often be a signpost crime, if you like, for a sexual offender. It's one of those things that we find sometimes with the benefit of hindsight that a more serious type of offender has started doing at a younger age. It often gets missed too, doesn't it, mate, with, maybe young coppers, maybe not so much now, but back in the day, even if it was reported, and it often isn't reported because understandably, if women have underwear and things taken, they may be reluctant to involve police and things. But even if it was reported, it would often be just labelled as a theft or a burglary, and it wouldn't jump up as being anything more than that. And as you so rightly say, coupled with a few of these other things, even at this very young age, we're starting to get some signposts here, aren't we, that this young bloke he's heading down a pathway which he may not be able to get off.
Yes, you're right. He was also found to have, he liked writing notes, writing short stories, but they were all pivotal around cruelty involving children, very sick writing, even a little bit a couple of years later, even his grandmother found some of his sick writings and made mention to his family about it. And I think the family knew that Derek wasn't the full quid, so to speak, but nothing was ever established or anything concrete done about it. He was just all these things just evolved around Derek, and even right through to when he passed away, not all that many years ago. There were so many incidents and behavioural patterns that you could attribute to Derek, but you could not specifically nail him for a number of offences that we believe he may have been involved in. There was just an aura of an illness that he carried with him.
So when did he first sort of come to light with regards to perhaps moving from that some of that behaviour that you're talking about into possibly, be it coincidental or otherwise, some sexual offences starting to occur in locations where he happened to be?
Well, he wasn't actually lined up with any specific offences at the time. He was totally unknown. He had no prior histories or whatever else. He was just a bit of an odd person known to those around him. But there was no specific, as I say, a course of conduct that we would label him as a predator or a serial sex fiend or anything like that. When you consider he was only about 18, 16, 17, 18 in these early days, and when he finally culminated in his arrest, he was only, I think, 20 or 21. He was only young. It was only a few years that all this sort of bubbled out. So once he came to light, came to prominence, then backtracking where he'd been, who he was, then all the pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place a little bit, that we could place him here, we could place him there, we can place him somewhere else. So it wasn't until he actually got arrested down here in Melbourne for a murder that we could then start to do a timeline of Derek, where he came from, where he'd been and what had been happening in those particular places.
So some of the cases that came to light, it was retrospective after he was arrested for a particular incident, and then started moving back, and you start piecing together where he was, the type of crimes that were committed, and some of them, correct me if I'm wrong, Adrian, were crimes that were committed at a time that this individual was in a location only for a very short period of time, a day, couple of days here or there, and these crimes would occur, and then there would be a similar pattern when he was in a different location. Is that sort of what you started to glean as you investigated this? Yeah,
absolutely. He ended up joining the Navy, and he was down at Cerberus, which is a naval base down in Western Port Bay down here in Victoria. Being in the Navy, he moved around a little bit. But even before that, when Mum and Dad would move around a bit, Derek had been to Adelaide, he'd been to the ACT. He'd been over to stay with his relatives, I think it was his grandparents over in, I think it was Glebe, over in Sydney. So he had occasion, or had reason to be in particular places. So it was only after, as I say, down here in Melbourne, where he literally got brought undone in quite a spectacular fashion, where a young girl was with a group of young friends just playing in the foreshore area. He bought a old Datsun station wagon, sort of a sandy brown coloured station wagon, and he had that for a couple of years. On this particular last event, which we'll be able to backtrack from this, he had it parked down on the foreshore there. One of the young boys who was with this young girl, they decided, which way are we going to go? You're going to go this way, I'm going to go that way. So they separated for a moment, and then all of a sudden, Derek, as we can say now, appeared. And the other young fellow who he suffered for the whole of his life, literally the whole of his life, suffered that he was unable to do anything to help her. But he had a small tomahawk, as going back in early days, that's what boys do. I used to have a big sheath knife I used to carry around like a big white hunter and things. That's what, you go out shooting rabbits and things. Well, this young fellow had a little tomahawk, and he was going to go and cut down little trees and do things that boys do. And he actually challenged Derek. And Derek said, put the tomahawk down, come here. And the boy refused. And he backed off into the bushes and left. So Derek took this young girl and put her in the car, and away they went, so to speak. He was in panic mode, of course, and he ran looking for help, and another family picked him up and said, "What happened?" So he explained it all. So they called the police, and then, as I say, the cavalry arrived and the investigation started. and saying to this young guy, what can you remember? What can you tell us? Tell us what you saw. And he described this man with this blondish sort of a hair and what have you, and he was driving a light-coloured Datsun station wagon, and it had a picture of a ship on the back window. So where would you look for a ship down in Western Port Bay? HMAS Cerberus. So they went down to HMAS Cerberus, and lo and behold, there's a sandy-coloured station wagon with a sticker on the back. So they go to the commandant and said, "Whose vehicle is that?" "It's Derek, able seaman Derek Percy." So they have a quick look around, and as I say, when the planets align, there's Derek washing the blood off his clothes still from where he'd returned back. And also there's other material, of course, found in his locker and things, but that was what brought him undone. So this is where this course of conduct that we've discussed comes out, where other children that had been murdered in various places had been murdered in a similar fashion to arouse the suspicion that could it possibly have been one and the same. So then we started to piece it together and do a timeline of what happened where, right through from the Beaumont children in Adelaide to the Wanda Beach murders of the two girls up in New South. And Derek, just by coincidence, just happened to be around the same place at the same time, within a short distance, even up in the ACT. The young boy up there was horrifically murdered as well, and Derek was in the ACT at the same time. So just opened up the can of worms for us to go digging.
Is this the case where he was actually found not guilty on the grounds of insanity? So he was jailed for life, but he was in essence jailed in a criminal environment for the criminally insane. Now, what that does, of course, is means he can apply for release at a point where he can try and prove that he's no longer the person he was, and he can be released back out into the community. So this must have added some additional pressure to the investigators wanting to make sure that this individual, because at that point he was guilty, even though in a court essence, due to insanity, not guilty of the murder of a young girl. But from what you're telling me, that he was very strongly suspected for, the Beaumont children, and some of these other infamous cases around Australia, that we could be aligning with the same offender. So I guess you had to, at that point, look at trying to prevent him from getting released, or if he was released, being able to charge him under some other jurisdiction. Is that sort of where you found yourself?
Yeah, it was. Detective Wayne Newman down here from the Homicide Squad. He did a tremendous amount of work, Wayne. He, credit where credit's due. The law is an ass, as they say, the travesty. Because he was found not guilty because of insanity, but it still stands that he was not guilty. He was still on the Navy payroll, so to speak, for the want of a better word, and receiving a Navy pension. So in the latter years, he had amassed over $100,000 in pension payments and all this sort of stuff. He was quite a wealthy man, sitting in Barwon Prison down there. The thought that he would be able to, maybe that money could be accessed and distributed to victims or victims' parents, that sort of thing, that wasn't an option, unfortunately, because confiscation of profits, or whichever umbrella you want to put it under. Derek had this amount of money, and he could, if he so chose, he could apply for bail every 12 months, parole every 12 months if he wanted to. So. And we were told that that was in fact what he wanted to do. He didn't fancy spending his life at the governor's pleasure, as they phrase it. So Wayne contacted the police in New South and said, "This is what we're trying to do, because if Derek gets out, you couldn't think about it. You just could not think about it." So working together with the New South Wales Police, how much evidence have you got left up there? So, some years back. So they gathered up whatever they had, and we had whatever we had down here. And in the Criminal Identification Squad where I worked, we put together a collection of evidence. Wayne was a driving force to put a brief together and approach the New South Wales coroner, Mr. Abernathy, to reopen the case into young Simon. A truck driver going past had seen a young teenager, 20s, whatever, with a mop of blonde hair, towing this little boy along, and he just didn't think that looked right, and he took a note of that person who drew a strong resemblance to Derek. Even in our squad, we did what we call a morphing, where we got a picture of Derek and the description from the truck driver, like an identikit type image, and morphed them one over the other. And you can see Derek's face just going in and out. It was, once again, you couldn't say it was concrete, but it was certainly a very exceptionally strong similarity that they were both one in the same person. So we took Derek out of Barwon Prison, popped him on a plane, and we flew him up to New South to the coroner's court up there. He did not utter a word from the moment he was picked up to the days when we spent up there and to the day when we brought him back to Barwon. He did not utter a word. He's just one extraordinarily weird individual. But the evidence that we went through up there for the coroner as he reopened it, the parents, the father, he was, I don't know how, he sat in court and listened to all the evidence that came out. And I don't know how he would do that. But his wife, she wanted to be there, but she had headphones on and just blowing it all out. But at the end of the exercise over those days, Mr. Abernethy sat there and he'd gone through all the evidence that we'd prepared in this inquest brief. And at the end of it, he said that he had no doubt that the person responsible for the death of Simon Brooke was Derek, Ernest Percy. And he referred the brief to the New South Wales Director of Public Prosecutions to have Derek charged with the murder of that young boy. Now, effectively, it wasn't going to happen because Derek, we took him back down and we kept him down here and locked him up. But the purpose of that exercise was achieved, that had for any reason Derek been able to get himself out on parole down here, he would have walked out the gates of Barwon Prison, put his hands in there and said, "I'm out." And while his hands were there, he would have been handcuffed and put on a plane and taken straight to Sydney and charged with murder and slotted in up at Long Bay or whatever else. So the purpose of the exercise to make sure, just to be sure, that he wasn't ever going to go anywhere. So he stayed down here in Barwon and he rotted in Barwon Prison, and he was dying from cancer. And Wayne went down with the local coroner from down here, Ian West, I believe it was, Ian, went down and sat by Derek's bedside and said, "Derek, in as many words, Derek, you're going to die. What a great thing you could just tell us about, all the other children, tell us all about it." Not a word. He just died taking everything with him. So he, on a number of occasions when he was challenged about where he was or what he'd done or anything else, he said, I might have done it. I might have been there. I could have done it, but I can't remember. I've got no recollection of it at all. So maybe in his twisted mind that may have been a fact. Perhaps he did what he did and didn't remember it, but he certainly knew what he did because it wasn't random. His acts were definitive. They were consistent in that course of conduct and the behaviour and the injuries, and it was just Derek all over the place. So it was just unfortunate in some ways, I guess, that the families of the other children, the victims, didn't get the satisfaction of knowing that Derek had actually been charged or convicted of those particular killings. But at least the fact that he's now off planet Earth, I don't know what you say. It's just thank God. Yeah.
And would it be fair to say, Adrian, that you and others that worked more closely in this case than anyone else, that you would believe that quite strongly that he is more than likely or very likely responsible for those infamous cases? I said that the disappearance of the Beaumont children, 1966, Glenelg Beach in Adelaide, the Wanda Beach murders, New South Wales, all indicators were that
he was literally within a kilometre or two walking distance, or just like you yourself or myself, we weren't anywhere there. Just Derek was the only person consistently in those places at each time, all those different places at that same time. So, on the balance of probabilities, speculative, a bit hard to excuse that, I think.
That's an amazing insight, mate, and to come face to face with an individual like that, Adrian, is something that you stays with you, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely. He just had I don't know what you call it, a stare. He could look straight look at you eye to eye, and he'd just look straight through you, and there was just nothing there. Obviously, he could not have had any feeling, any compassion, any. His acts were totally inhuman, absolutely inhuman. And if it was for male to male adult, even that would not be. You couldn't comprehend that. But for children, it's just beyond belief, beyond words. It really is.
Adrian, I just want to thank you so very much for taking the time to come to the Melbourne studio and have a chat to us. It's been wonderful to meet with you. I wouldn't mind perhaps down the track having you back in the seat again and chat a bit more, as I said, about some of the other work that you've done in the job. But thanks very much for dropping in.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. It's nice to share it. Thanks very much.
Crime Insiders Detectives is a LiSTNR original production. It's hosted by me, Brent Sanders, produced by Ed Gooden, and sound designed and imaged by Link Kelly.